So we've recently received some new endgame information on the upcoming Lord of Hatred expansion for Diablo 4. And while this video doesn't have a ton of new stuff, if you've been following all the previous information we've received, there are a few things we can glean from this, and we've also gotten a look at additional nodes for the Warplans skill trees that are the endgame focused skill trees for all of the different pieces of endgame content. So there is some interesting stuff to glean from this video. Now, I think the most interesting and most direct information we received is some of the nodes for the endgame skill trees that are going to be part of the Warplans system. Now, if you've been following my channel, I've talked about the system many times by now, but if you don't know what the system is, in this upcoming expansion, there's going to be a new Warplans system that is a pretty big evolution on the endgame of Diablo 4. One part of the Warplans system is going to be a playlist, which you essentially go through and choose what endgame content you want to partake in. You can get more rewards than you would normally get from the content. You go through this playlist of 5 different endgame activities. You complete it, getting all those rewards. Then you go to the next Warplan, and as you go further and further into the Warplan system, you get more and more rewards. But then you also have the endgame skill trees that are also tied to the Warplan system. So every piece of endgame content will have its own skill tree. We're just partaking in that endgame content. We'll give you experience points for these skill trees, but you'll get a lot more of that from going through the Warplans playlist system. And there's a few nodes from these endgame skill trees that I wanted to show off that I just found more interesting. I will be doing another video in the future, probably the next couple of days, where I go over all of the nodes we've seen so far, because a lot of them are pretty interesting, and that's also considering that we haven't seen any of the nodes at the very bottom of these skill trees. And based upon the nodes we've seen so far, the lower you get into these trees, the more interesting or impactful these nodes seem to be. So the first node I want to go over is in the Helltide skill tree, and this is called Hellborn Horde. So threat level ambushes have a chance to spawn additional Hellborn. So it's a 50% chance to spawn 1 additional Hellborn, a 20% chance to spawn 3 additional Hellborn, and a 5% chance to spawn 4 additional Hellborn, and Hellborn have a chance to drop a unique when slain. So this is just something that would be really cool whenever it procs. So this is essentially when you're in Helltides and your threat meter is building up. Once you build up that threat meter, it starts spawning waves of enemies on you. Once your threat meter then empties, it'll spawn a Hellborn at the end. This has a chance to just spawn a bunch of them, up to 5 total. Also gives a higher chance to get uniques from them. And it does also seem there are other nodes that will change these Hellborn into something else. And I'm presuming with that whatever you change the Hellborn spawns into is what will also spawn additionals of if you take this node as well. Specifically, one of the developers revealed a node that instead of getting Hellborn, you could get Butchers to spawn in their place. So presumably, if you mix that node with this node, you could have a chance to get like 5+ Butchers spawning on you instead of just the 1 normal Hellborn. Some of these nodes are just going to have these really impactful points that you have just an RNG chance to get. And the reason I say that is because another one of these nodes has a very similar thing. And this is in the Nightmare Dungeon skill tree, and this is called Answered Prayer. So activating a shrine in a Nightmare Dungeon can cause an elite ambush. 40% chance for 1 elite, 30% chance for 2, 20% chance for 4, and a 10% chance to spawn 7 elites. And this is absolutely crazy. And the other node we're also going to go over mixed with this can also be pretty ridiculous. We're mixing this node, and the next node we're going to go over will just allow you to essentially double the elites you're getting from this. And this again is just something that's really cool, because if you go and click on a shrine and you get 7 elites to spawn, that'll just be a really cool experience that breaks up the normal gameplay. And also keep in mind with Nightmare Sigils, unless they're completely changed, a lot of the worst Nightmare Sigils that I think most people just get rid of are the ones that just have shrine spawns as their affix. But now with this node and the next node we're going to go over, being able to go into Nightmare Dungeon and have a bunch of shrines spawn in there is actually going to be very, very valuable depending on what nodes you actually go into. Now, the other node within the Helltide skill tree, which is actually a previous node from the one we just went over, is Communion. While in a Nightmare Dungeon, killing an enemy after activating a shrine traps their soul within you. when the shrine power expires, all trapped souls will escape and spawn around you as renewed enemies. Now this one is absolutely ridiculous because within a shrine buff, you could very well clear a large portion of a dungeon. So pretty much how this is just going to work is you click a shrine, anything you kill when that shrine buff is active on you will be trapped inside of you as a soul. When it ends, all of those enemies just respawn around you. Now I'm not exactly sure how this is going to work on a technical level. My assumption is that it won't overpopulate past a certain point, so you'll have to kill enemies for maybe the rest of the souls to be released, because you would also need a physical amount of space for these enemies to actually be there. But like I mentioned, mixing this with the other node we just went over, where now you just have a chance for an elite ambush whenever you click a shrine, you could potentially go to a Nightmare Dungeon, click on a shrine, it spawns 7 elites on you, you kill all 7 of those elites, and then you continue on through your dungeon, killing dozens and dozens of additional enemies. Then when the shrine buff ends, those 7 elites and all of the other enemies you defeated in that time are all just going to respawn. So there are going to be some pretty crazy combinations just based off these handful of nodes that we've gotten to see. And there's a bunch of other nodes in these skill trees, and you can get up to 7 skill points per tree. So keep in mind, just these 2 nodes we just went over, just those 2 combined can pretty heavily change up a Nightmare Dungeon run. But imagine also adding in 5 more points that could also do some pretty crazy stuff. And I think the biggest through point as we get more and more of these nodes revealed is that these endgame skill trees are going to have a pretty big impact on just what happens in endgame content. A lot of these nodes aren't just like increases to gear drops or experience or base things like that. A lot of these are legitimate gameplay changes that will just break up the normal stuff you're doing and can give you crazy events like this that can just randomly occur, which I think is a really good way to go about these. Because even if you're not getting more rewards necessarily, just having these big gameplay changes or event changes within this content will just make it more fun and interesting in general. And then when you keep in mind that we're going to have up to Torment 12, so you can have the content as difficult as you want, combined with some stuff like this will make it pretty difficult as well. But that brings us to the second thing I wanted to go over that was kind of revealed in this video, but it's more just something you could see if you were paying really close attention during this video, and that's the pretty big change to gearing, and more specifically, a seeming massive change to ancestral gear. Now, we have gotten a look at this being a thing in previous footage of the expansion, but a lot of that stuff was like a month or months ago, so we didn't really know if that was just work in progress stuff that was kind of like that and would be changed later on or finished. But now that we're so much closer to the expansion, and this is supposed to be advertisement for the expansion, it seems like this stuff is going to be set in stone at this point. So the big change I'm talking about here is that it seems that ancestral gear is no longer going to be guaranteed greater affixes, which brings into question, how are we going to get greater affixes? Is that more going to be part of the gear modification system in Haradrim cubes? So we don't exactly know, but because of some of the other gear we've gotten to see from previous videos, ancestral gear is also seeming to be more interesting, even though it won't be guaranteed ancestral, because they opened their inventory in this most recent video, and we got to see all of the gear they're wearing, which is all legendary or unique, and you can see the normal ancestral animation the gear pieces have, which is the kind of white fading at the top of the item card. A bunch of their pieces of gear have it, but all of them don't have greater affixes on them. In fact, only one of their pieces of gear has a greater affix on it. The rest of it is still ancestral, but it doesn't have greater affixes on it, which is very, very interesting. And my biggest presumption here is that greater affixes are going to be more a part of the endgame gear modification system. Either that, or they're massively reducing how many greater affixes we're going to be getting to reduce our overall power, because realistically, greater affixes are just a massive power increase overall. So if they want to remove some power from the game to just make us not as strong and put power elsewhere and maybe make the game more balanced, you could just remove greater affixes or make them much more rare so it doesn't feel like you really need them, and you could remove some power that way, because realistically, greater affixes aren't like a super interesting thing. They are something you have to chase a bit more, but they're not something that's necessarily super interesting, especially if you compare it to like having crazier effects in our talisman or something. Now, in previous videos, we have gotten to see some other ancestral pieces, more specifically an in a previous IGN video, we get to see blue ancestral piece of gear drop. So they killed an enemy and a ancestral piece of a blue gauntlets drop. And this also goes back to greater affixes maybe being a part of the gear modification system, because we know that the developers are wanting us to be able to take blue gear and up and turn it into, say, best in slot endgame gear through the Heraldric Cube. So there's going to be that journey of being able to take even low rarity gear and fully mod it and put a bunch of resources into it to make it a juiced up endgame piece of gear. We don't know if this is going to be possible for white gear, because the developers, as of like a month ago, were still arguing this in the team if they want to make this available with white items or not, but we know it's available for blue items, so them being able to be ancestral is probably pretty important. And then in an official video even further back, we got to see an ancestral rare ring that has 3 affixes on it, and it does not have a greater affix as well. So it seems that all rarities, at least blue and up, will be able to be ancestral pieces. And I think the main thing of them being ancestral is they're going to be the highest item level, meaning they will have higher rolls than non-ancestrals, but they're not guaranteed greater affixes anymore. So again, we don't know if greater affixes are still going to be a random roll, just much more rare, or if greater affixes are maybe only going to be a part of the gear modification system now. Maybe we can only get greater affixes doing something with gear modification, maybe using a bunch of resources, or it could just be the greater affixes are much more rare to, again, take power out of having the same stats at a slightly higher roll and putting them in more interesting things in other systems. But that's realistically all of the new information we received from this video. There was also some other stuff with like fishing and some things like that, but nothing really interesting, especially when it comes to the end game. And like I mentioned in my previous video, we do have a developer live stream coming up before the launch of the expansion, where they are going to go over a lot of the new systems coming with the expansion. So we'll probably learn a lot more there. But all in all, a few pieces of interesting information. For me personally, the most exciting part obviously being the endgame skill trees with some of the nodes we got to see. Some of those are just seeming to be incredibly fun when you actually get those things to work in your endgame gameplay. But that's all I want to go over. So thanks for watching.